Sri Aurobindo is describing the human quest for the supreme, the divine, the infinite, the absolute, as the object of spiritual knowledge. We found that this object is beyond the domain of sensory knowledge and beyond the power of intellectual cognition. And there is a higher means of knowledge which exists above, which is able to know that. But that higher knowledge can know that in exclusion, or from its knowledge of that, it can turn and relate to the world. And when it sees the world from that poise, it sees the material domain as a rough ground for the self-expression of the soul, a material foundation for its self-unfolding and self-possessing in the terms of the universe. And while we have dwelt on it before, there are nuances which we can fully appreciate only when we experience the universe in non-human ways. We start with the error, which is inevitable, of viewing the universe in terms of only our experience and thinking this is all. But there are experiences of the universe which are so different that the human experience can at best be seen as a very narrow, limited domain. There are many interesting descriptions of human beings traveling in the subtle worlds, meeting beings of other domains, and those interactions. Some of it in theosophical literature, some of it in among other independent mystics. And one thing common is that those beings of other domains rarely find it interesting to interact with the material world. They are already living in such domains of wonder and beauty and joy, so complete, so all-inclusive, that they find interaction with the material world to be dulling, limiting, suffocating, darkening even, and would rather stay away. In one recent such description which I happened to read, this person who found himself out of the body journeying through different domains, he met with someone who said to him, yes, we have been together, we have been working across many lives, but there is one other person who also you know from other earlier incarnations, who is not so interested in the material world, and he finds our fascination with the material world to be strange. So it also is a fact that as one goes up the scale of the different domains of consciousness, we find similar responses even from beings of which we may call godlike. Very few of them really take a direct interest in material affairs. And Mother quotes Theon as saying that it was his belief that those beings who found themselves interested in material affairs, they were destined to take human birth and evolve. Now, this gives us some idea of how much or how little the human experience matters in the larger cosmic scheme. So when we speak of this experience of seeing the material world as a rough ground for self-expression of the soul and a material foundation for its self-unfolding, self-possessing in the terms of the universe, we can see how unimportant that appears to be in the larger cosmic scheme. And yet, in the way Sri Aurobindo presents it, we find that the possibility of the divine finding himself, unfolding himself in terms of a universe, in terms of materiality, in terms of this resistant domain and substance, that possibility itself is something so impossible that the fulfillment of that possibility would be a great victory for the divine, and it would even be the crest, the culmination of the whole struggle of this material journey. Seen in that perspective, this domain, so dark, so narrow, so suffocating, is destined to be the domain of something which is the most extraordinary ever experienced in the whole cosmos. Although that extraordinary experience is still far away, we are able to conceive of it only. So it is with this view that we have to appreciate Sri Aurobindo's description of what the material domain seems to be when seen from above. And we discover that all these mental, vital, and physical domains have value in relation to the absolute. They do not have value intrinsically. Over 3 paragraphs, Sri Aurobindo described each of these and described how this supreme reality can be known in relation to the individual, what it is in relation to the individual. And now we come to that reality in relation to the universe. But in relation to the individual, that supreme is our own true and highest self, that which ultimately we are in our essence, that of which we are in our manifested nature. This question had been put to my teacher, N.P. Pandit: what is God? And there's a very interesting talk that he gave on that theme, but just a few ideas that I remember. He articulated it in terms which were accessible. He said, God can be approached in many ways, and they are all simultaneously valid. God is our own highest potential. God is our own highest fulfillment, and so on. There are many ways of looking at it. But this idea that the Supreme is our own true and highest self, our own fulfillment, but highest, changes our sense of who we are. We could say we are the body and stop. We could say we are the life force and stop. We could say we are the mind and stop. But if we say we are just that, the whole meaning of life, purpose of life, is different for each of these 3 identities. When we say that we are none of these, we are the Supreme itself in our true and highest self, then suddenly the whole meaning of life changes. Our purpose in life changes. Who we are in relation to the mind, life, and body changes. It is to such a radical shift that we are being led to by the first 3 steps. Not identifying ourselves with the body, not identifying ourselves with life energy, not identifying ourselves with mind. And yet, when we find ourselves to be that Supreme in our true and highest self, we discover that we have a mind, have a life energy, we have a body, and we chose it, even worked to build it for a purpose. And that purpose was precisely to create a means for self-unfolding and self-possessing in the terms of the universe. That Supreme does not need universe, does not need to unfold itself in terms of matter, does not need to possess itself or play out in relation to universal experiences. It is complete in itself. But we, as that, chose the experience of unfolding ourselves, discovering ourselves, expressing ourselves in terms of universe, and in this, what is presently a rough ground for our self-expression. We chose that journey, we chose that experience while we were that. In other words, that Supreme chose this experience, and we are the Supreme, the part of the Supreme that has engaged with this experience, while another part of the Supreme enjoys its freedom above. Another part of ourselves enjoys our own greater freedom above. And when we chose this experience, there was a long process in terms of the unfolding time in material universe to build the vehicle for this self-expression, self-discovery, self-unfolding and self-possessing in the domain of matter. And therefore, while we may appear to be bound in this material experience, we chose to enter this minding, not simply to withdraw in some higher liberation, which we already have in our own highest parts, but precisely to fulfill our mission here, to bring down that highest possibility in this domain. So when we look at our relationship with the Supreme from our individual standpoint, and find that we are, the Supreme is our own true and highest self, what we are in our essence, suddenly everything changes. All of these implications become inevitable, and the whole meaning and purpose of life changes. Our sense of space, our sense of time, our sense of limitations of our body and our life force and our mind, all of these now are put in a larger context. That limitations are there so that they may be overcome. That limitations are there because we have within us infinite potential which needs to be unfolded gradually, and therefore limitations are necessary in the beginning. That because we are that in our essence, there is nothing which can prevent us from freely manifesting and overcoming these limitations. And so there is an assurance of the whole journey, of the inevitability of the fulfillment, and so on. And if we can keep this as a backdrop of our larger understanding of our own existence and life, we will find all our values, all our responses to everything in the world change radically. The mistake is the materialist idea that takes this brain, mind, body as the only reality. So Sri Aurobindo gives us the correction. When seen from above, we see that matter, and our body in particular, is a sensible form of the infinite. And in that sense, it is a temple, it is a vehicle for the infinite to manifest himself. Life force, similarly, for all its potential, life force is the dynamization of a consciousness which exceeds it. And mind is, he says, a half-light thrown from the infinite as a precursor to a still greater light which has to also come in and enter the world from that infinite. Then there was another important idea which we dwelt on last time, when Sri Aurobindo says that when we realize the traditional way, we realizes that there is this Atman, the self, the original and essential nature of our existence, and rushes to realize it, bypassing all the degrees in between, then it can actually enter into the infinite and fall asleep. Or if it remains awake, it is only in the highest experience of the Supreme which is accessible to the self-annulling mind. But it is not the highest experience of the Supreme in itself. And then he says, the mind can only be aware of the self in a mentalized spiritual thinness, only of the mind reflected Satchidananda. I mentioned last time the traditional image of the mountain peak and the sun above. The surface layer of the mountain peak on which the light falls, that's this mind reflected Satchidananda, and the fine spiritual thinness where we can know that light. Such is the nature of the human mind even when it turns to the Satchidananda. There's this very thin layer of the mind which can know that. And obviously, that's not the greatest realization, that's not our greatest potential. In this context, it is worth seeing what Sri Aurobindo has to say of the two great movements for this realization, which were articulated by the Buddhist and the Advaitic view. In the letters, there are several descriptions of the avatars, their role, and so on. And he refers to the last three of the traditional sequence, Krishna, Buddha, and Kalki, depict the last three stages, the stages of the spiritual development. Krishna opens the possibility of overmind. Buddha tries to shoot beyond to the supreme liberation, but that liberation is still negative, not returning upon earth to complete positively the evolution. Kalki is to correct this by bringing the kingdom of the divine upon earth, destroying the opposing asura forces. The progression is striking and unmistakable. So this is from one of his letters on page 402, volume 22 of the centenary volumes. So he is placing these three avatars in a certain sequence. Krishna opens the possibility of overmind, and this is a level just above the intellectual mind in preparation for this higher grade of knowledge of the supramental. But Buddha tries to shoot beyond to the supreme liberation, bypassing this sequence. And then Kalki corrects that by completing the sequence and bringing down the higher. In the next letter on the same page, again the same description but with certain differences. In speaking of supreme liberation, I was simply taking the Buddhist Advaita view for granted and correcting it by saying that this nirvana view is too negative. Krishna opened the possibility of overmind with its two sides of realization, static and dynamic. Buddha tried to shoot from mind to nirvana in the Supreme, just as Shankara did in another way after him. Both agree in overleaping the other stages and trying to get at a nameless and featureless absolute. Krishna, on the other hand, was leading by the normal course of evolution. The next normal step is not a featureless absolute, but the supermind. I consider that in trying to overshoot, Buddha, like Shankara, made a mistake, calling away the dynamic side of the liberation. Therefore, there has to be a correction by Kalki. So it's something very interesting here. Krishna opens the possibility of the realization of these two sides, the static and the dynamic. And immediately we can see that evolution is inevitably intended to have this double status. Buddha and Shankara go after only one side, leaping across the evolutionary stages, bypassing the supramental. So all of this we now understand in the context which we are currently discussing, where he says it is possible to enter into this higher goal and then fall into a swoon or know it only in a partial, rarefied domain of mind. But this is a hasty rush, skipping the steps in between. And the steps in between, he says, without even seeing these great and luminous kingdoms of the spirit which intervene. So, in order to gain this integral self knowledge, the highest truth, we have to go through these steps. He says, the highest truth, the integral self knowledge, is not to be gained by this self blinded leap into the absolute, but by a patient transit beyond the mind into the truth consciousness, where the infinite can be known, felt, seen, experienced in all the fullness of its unending riches. There we discover this self. There we discover this self that we are to be not only a static, tenuous, vacant Atman, but a great dynamic spirit, individual, universal, and transcendent. This self and spirit cannot be expressed by the mind's abstract generalizations. All the inspired descriptions of the seers and mystics cannot exhaust its contents and its splendors. Already in describing this great self in terms of its individual, universal, and transcendent status, Sri Aurobindo has set the ground for the next facet of the discussion. We saw the Supreme in relation to the self and as a personal, subjective journey. But what is this Supreme in relation to the universe? Because that relationship is independent of our individual self. So now he takes up this discussion and then he merges the two things. In relation to the universe, the Supreme is Brahman, the one reality, which is not only the spiritual, material, and conscious substance of all the ideas and forces and forms of the universe, but their origin, support, and possessor, the cosmic and supracosmic spirit. All the last terms to which we can reduce the universe, force and matter, name and form, Purusha and Prakriti, are still not entirely that which the universe really is, either in itself or its nature. So this description now takes the whole relationship in a very impersonal ground. What is the Supreme in relation to the universe? And the universe is impersonal. There's no individuality. There's no relationship as such. The universe simply is this great mass of reality. But in relation to the universe, the Supreme is Brahman. And what do we mean by Brahman? If we go back to the etymology of the word, it's a very interesting discussion that Sri Aurobindo has in his Secret of the Veda. He discusses there how the word Brahman itself represents this emergence into manifestation in a vibration of consciousness. And if you notice how this reflects in the articulation in human speech, it's fascinating to see the correspondence. First, there is a welling up of the air from the lungs, and the air is blocked, held back by the lips. the air builds up pressure. Until it builds up pressure, you cannot speak. Only when you have built up the pressure, the lips are holding, suddenly the lips give way. Okay? So this itself you will find so similar to the description of the Big Bang, the enormous release of energy by which the universe is born. B. But the B is not simply a throwing out. It is a conscious release into manifestation of the power which wants to manifest. So when it releases, it does not want just a static, flat, featureless expression. If the way science describes it, the Big Bang was simply one massive release of energy, everything should have evenly spread out. We cannot explain why there are such distinct features. So physics had to make up a story to explain these distinct features by describing some inflationary theory which amplifies fine variations which are existent in the original release of energy. And these variations are subatomic quantic variations which come from uncertainty principle. The whole story basically says that there is a very fine variation whose cause we do not know, but which is underlying all reality. And when the energy is released, those fine variations are already there as a vibration, they get amplified. Now that's the science story. It's just a story. We don't really know what happened. It's a hypothesis, it's a description. And then we try to find whether there's any evidence for it. But we constructed the story to match the evidence anyway. So it's a bit circular in logic. But in the Vedic description, when you go, the word Brahman starts with B, the release of this pent up force, and immediately it moves to manifest form and distinction, not a featureless, flat, empty space. So there is this vibration, brr, the R, representing also the principle of delight and play, which allows this movement of multiplicity and relationships to manifest. So Bra, and then the force of the energy in the vibration, Bra, the H fills with energy. And a second movement, Brahman. And the man, of course, has in the etymology further associations with mind, the mana, and so on. I won't go into detail, but you get the sense of how the word itself carries the sense of this movement of manifestation. Brahman. So when we speak of Brahman, we mean not only that which is the origin of things, but also that as it moves into manifestation, and the manifestation is included in Brahman. So he says, the one reality which is not only the spiritual, material and conscious substance of all ideas and forces and forms of the universe, but their origin, support and possessor, the cosmic and supra-cosmic spirit. So it's a long sentence, but it catches the completeness of what we mean by this concept of Brahman. First of all, it is the one reality. The single most important sense of Brahman is the underlying oneness. It is that into which everything resolves itself. It has to be therefore one. It cannot be two. When we speak of the absolute, there cannot be two different absolutes. If two people started in their quest with whatever vocabulary to discover and realize the absolute, whatever their starting point, whatever their entry into the journey, whatever the nature of the journey, when they get to the absolute, they cannot say, your absolute is different from my absolute. By definition, it would not be absolute then. By definition, the absolute has to end up with one single. And so this underlying sense of oneness is the first and most important characteristic of the concept of Brahman, But it is not a oneness in which everything merges and lapses into some blank featurelessness. It is, Sri Aurobindo says, a oneness of identity, not numerical oneness. Numerical oneness has a problem. The moment you say one, you have automatically that which is not one, and therefore there is a two. And the moment you have two, you have something in between the one and two, and there's a three, and the whole chain follows. The moment you define numerical oneness, all the other numbers follow immediately. You don't even have to think of why. They are there in the very concept of a oneness separate from the rest, a numerical oneness. But the oneness of Brahman is a oneness of identity. All that you can conceive of lapses back into the same identity. They are not different. In this one, they are the same. All the rays of the sun merge back into the center of the circle. In that oneness, although all the rays are pointing in different directions, they merge back and unite. That's the identity of oneness of Brahman. So the one reality, and capital R, because it is a reality which is all inclusive, which is not only the spiritual, material, and conscious substance of all ideas and forces and forms of the universe. So we are discussing here three substances: the spiritual, the material, and the conscious substance. This is another way of looking at Brahman. Brahman is that which is the underlying substance from which all things emerge. Science goes through this quest of finding an ultimate underlying reality. And you can wonder why. Why did not science simply start by saying, we'll describe how this big machine of the universe works? Somehow already implicit within us, and we don't even realize that it is so, we know that there has to be something simpler which explains this more complex universe. And that simpler thing is a deeper reality than the complexity which is more phenomenal and superficial. This idea that there is a deeper underlying simpler reality is as if deep rooted in our intuitive knowledge. We know it deep inside, and if somebody says it's not true, we look at him and wonder, is this gone crazy? And if somebody makes a whole big philosophy that says there is no such thing as an underlying, deeper, simpler reality, this complexity is the only reality, we'll say, yes, it's a nice concept, a nice philosophy, but it doesn't satisfy me who am seeking to understand the universe, because it explains nothing. It says you cannot understand. And I believe it can be understood. And that's again a deep rooted intuitive knowledge that we have, that there is some part in us which can understand this whole humongous, multifaceted universe. And when it understands it, it will be in terms of something very simple. This idea is so deep rooted. And so the scientist is not satisfied unless he keeps on going to something which is simpler underlying. There's a whole book which appeared on this theme by a Nobel laureate physicist, which is titled Truth and Beauty, Dr. S. Chandrasekhar, in which he explains that we somehow innately assume that which is more true to be naturally also more beautiful. And if it's not beautiful, we don't accept that it is true. Somehow ugliness is not true. Beauty is truth. And a simple underlying beautiful insight is the underlying truth of this whole universe. And so science peels off layers after layers trying to get to that. It gets to a very simplified recognition that all matter is made of three particles: electrons, protons, neutrons. And then suddenly it finds itself lost in this oscillating wave particle play of energy and cannot make out what's that underlying reality, except to say it is pure energy taking on the appearance of particles as waves and particles. So we notice that there is something underlying But we do not know anymore whether to call it substance. We call it empty space, and yet that empty space has energy. It has properties. It has a power to form particles out of itself and to absorb them into itself. And where does that come from? And suddenly science finds itself confused, lost. But we have this idea that there is an underlying something which is the basis of it all. So Brahman, the one reality, which is not only the spiritual, material and conscious substance of all ideas, forces and forms of the universe. So there's a material substance, there is an underlying substance which is spiritual. And this is the Vedic experience. In terms of the modern physics, we might use this underlying substance as a 0-point energy, but it is still material energy. In the old days, they would have called it an underlying ether. But Sri Aurobindo, using that terminology, says there is a physical ether, and behind it, there is a mental ether, which is more subtle, more rarefied, which is the substance of which all the subtle worlds are formed. And a densified version of that is the physical ether from which the physical universe is formed. So there is, as if behind the physical ether, this huge domain of the subtler worlds, and worlds after worlds after worlds, far bigger, more complex, more infinite than even the material, all held in this underlying mental substance. And behind that is the one divine conscious being or presence, the cause of it all. So causal substance, we may say. So he uses here a different term, spiritual, material and conscious substance of all the ideas, forces and forms of the universe. Now if you had to describe all the things in the universe, you could make a long list, take up the dictionary and say there are this. But we could abstract from there. And we would say, yes, there are objects which have form, and then there are forces which do not have form, which act upon objects. And so physics deals with objects and forces. But if we go further, we realize that our cognition of those objects and forces involves a third thing, which is idea of object, idea of force, idea of their relationships. And there's the domain of psychology which deals with the ideas. And in this sense, we can say everything in the universe could be reduced to these three terms. Either they are forms of objects, or they are formless forces acting upon objects, or they are idea which can appear in form and in force, but which is something more essential. And so he says, this underlying substance of all ideas and forces and forms of the universe. And in these three terms, everything is grasped. But it is not only the substance of all ideas, forces and forms, but also their origin, support and possessor, the cosmic and supracosmic spirit. So where did all these ideas and objects and forces come from? Well, they come from that. How are they allowed to sustain? They're sustained because of that behind it. And who plays with them, who uses them, who informs them, possesses them? It is that. And these three are the three relationships of the universe with its foundation, with the Brahman in its origin. The first is the relationship of the Brahman as originator. I am the God who is creator of all things. I breathe the universe into creation and so on. But the second relationship, which religions don't like, is that I am that which watches uninvolved. So the physicist likes this idea very much, at least in the beginning that was the idea. The divine watchmaker, he has made this machinery, wound up the clock and then let it go, and he is watching it. So you still have the idea of a creator, but a creator only in a limited way. He's created it and now he's out of the system. He watches it, lets it get to wherever it goes. And religions are often moralists don't like this idea. How can God stand back and not intervene when there's so much pain and suffering and destruction? Then he would be a very wicked God and so on. But this is the second relationship. And the third relationship, which is more interesting, it is he who possesses the universe. He is immanent. The universe is made of himself. It is his body. He possesses all these forms and forces and ideas, inhabiting them and enjoying them fully. These three terms are expressed in the yogic philosophy with three different names: Brahman, Purusha, and Ishvara. So in the first relationship, Brahman stands back. He is the origin of all things, but he is just the origin into which everything lapses back, from which everything comes. He doesn't have any other relationship except from being the origin. But in the second relationship, he is watching, but not merely watching. In the very act of watching, he supports. Because he watches, the universe keeps on moving. He is the energy which dynamizes the clockwork that's running. And in the third, he is himself immanent, upholding from within, enjoying, taking upon himself the brunt of all of the experience. And then suddenly the moralist God gives way to something which is much more profound. It is the divine himself who enjoys and suffers within us. He participates in this play, and from deep within us pushes constantly to overcome, to change, and to transform the nature of this world. So origin, support, and possessor, the cosmic and supracosmic spirit. The double station, he is in it as well as above it at the same time, as spirit, immanent. So this is the way he describes Brahman, and this is in relation to the universe, the supreme is Brahman. And you can see the whole description is so complete but also impersonal. It is an objective description of the relationship of the Supreme with the universe, as contrasted earlier with what we saw, the subjective relation of us with the Supreme. So in this objective relationship, we now explore the different elaborations of these various facets. All the last terms to which we can reduce the universe, force and matter, name and form, Purusha and Prakriti, are still not entirely that which the universe really is, either in itself or its nature. Now again, we are faced with, even in describing the universe, for all the objectivity we may have, we have to distinguish between what the universe is in itself and what the universe is in its nature. Because there is a phenomenon, and the phenomenon is not the reality underlying. And so we have to distinguish between these two layers. But the moment we do that, we find ourselves with a kind of a duality everywhere. There is the phenomenon which has a certain characteristic, but the thing which is the cause of the phenomenon is the deeper truth. And yet the phenomenon is being experienced, and there's a relationship between the two. You remove one and the other fails. You remove the deeper truth, the phenomenon vanishes. You remove the phenomenon and you cannot know that deeper truth. This is the interesting part. When I touch, I feel a sensation, and there's a whole phenomenon, you may say. But what's the truth behind? We may say, oh, it's all energy, it's all whatever you choose to call it at that point. But if you remove the sensation and the phenomenon associated with the sensation, well, you don't have the other. You cannot know it anyway. It might just as well not exist. So this thing of the two sides, the underlying thing in itself, and then the form of it or the nature of it, you cannot separate. Even in Buddhism, which goes into a emptiness as the ultimate reality and describes it in terms of an emptiness unknowable, they have this concept of the nature of the emptiness, and that is the Dharmakaya, the divine form, the divine body, the divine nature, and so on. The moment you have something which you can conceive of, there is associated with it a way of knowing it. And so there's always this pairing, and he refers to three pairs here: force and matter, name and form, and Purusha and Prakriti. Now you could see on some level the three are identical. The three pairs are identical. They're just different ways of approaching this duality. But they are different pairs in the emphasis that they provide. So the first one, force and matter, is the pairing that we see in the domain of physics, in the domain of matter. When physics explores matter all the way through, it finds this duality of something which is underlying matter and then a force. Now the common textbook physics will treat force and matter as two separate things. And so you have physics proper, which deals with the material and the forces acting on the material. You could ignore the forces and think of matter as something which simply exists. Or you have specialized branches of physics which deal with dynamics of particles, dynamics of electricity, electrodynamics, which deal more with the forces than with the material objects. And they're just two different specialized branches. But that's the superficial view. When you go a little deeper, you will find the two merge and they are not separable anymore. What is matter? You say, oh, it is a bundle of electron, proton, neutron, an atom, whatever it is you choose, a particle, whichever level you take. Let's say I will take for the moment a particle, an electron, which is supposed to be one of the fundamental particles. I want to know this particle. How can I know it? I approach the particle and suddenly I discover I cannot know it directly. I can only know it by the resistance it offers to me as I approach it. The particle is known by the electric field that is around it. And when I approach to interact with the electron, I interact with the field, which is nothing but an extension of a force. And I can only know the force because that's all I can touch. If I get too close, the force is so great that the particle is repelled or I am repelled. I can never meet the particle. I might even say, and there would be nothing changed in physics by saying this, there is no electron. There is only the force field of electron. The reality of electron is its force field. And nothing would change in physics. Or you could say there is electron which I can never know, but force field is its nature. And I can only know its nature. I cannot know the thing itself. Electron is unknowable except by conception, by theory, etc. I can never meet it. And this is the reality of all particles. There is the thing in itself which can never be known, and then there is the force field, which is its only expression, the only thing you can know. And this brings us to the second way of approach, which very quickly physics gets to. As it turns out, all the early physicists of the last century ended up becoming also philosophers in the process. And the philosophy now looks not at the physical reality, but what is our experience of the universe? We notice that there is a form and then a name that we give to the form describing the qualities of the form. So you say there is flower, but is there flower really? Is there really that form? We have only the qualities we experience of the flower and the name that we give to it. And the name generally is associated with the qualities. It describes the qualities. We eat food. Do you really know what the food is in itself? You only know the form in terms of the name and the bundle of qualities that are associated with it. You only know the qualities of the food. And so there is this philosophical approach, and in the yogic tradition, the world of duality is described in terms of name and form, nama and rupa. These are the only things you can see truly. What it is that expresses as name, what it is that expresses as form, we just cannot know. So we have a form, we give a name to it describing the qualities. The physicist does exactly the same thing looking at the hard material experience. There is a force, and then there is the matter. And I can say the matter is arranged in this form by knowing the force that it puts out. And so I can say this matter is soft, this matter is hard, this matter is oxygen, this matter is iron, that matter is gold. I can give a form to it, I can describe its qualities, but what is it that appears as form, what it is that appears as forces, I don't know. And this is where the whole physics is stuck. When it's looking for an ultimate theory of everything, it has to describe something which appears in terms of matter and in terms of force. The psychologist similarly has to observe the universe and say, there is an underlying reality that I can only know in terms of form and name, nama and rupa. When the yogi in deep concentration breaks through the name and the form and enters that underlying reality, all name and all form are gone. It is nameless and formless. So how would you describe it? It is without force, it is without matter. How do you experience it? And suddenly you are as if on the other side in something which has no correlation with our domain of language and human interchange. So the yogi comes out of that deep identity with that and breaks into the world of name and form in a shock and says, I cannot describe what I experienced. Even the memory of it cannot register in the mind which can only know in terms of name and form. So the yogic knowledge, exploring the universe in this way, all the different levels, found everywhere there was this ultimate resolution to that underlying consciousness and the quality and power that it puts out. And this is the truth on all levels of experience. This is the basis of the whole universe. And it gave it two names, Purusha and Prakriti. So now the whole thing, breaking away from pure physics, breaking away from the psychology, going to a still deeper underlying experiential description. You say there is a state of consciousness in which you are Purusha, there is a state of consciousness in which you are Prakriti, and they are related to each other, but they are different. They are together always. One cannot be described without the other, one cannot exist without the other, and yet they are completely different. They are like two sides of the coin. If you have a coin, well, you have two sides. You can't somehow eliminate one side and say a one-sided coin. It's just not possible. So the same way in this reality, there are two sides without which there is no experience of reality. Now, what is the description of these two? In essence, there is a pure consciousness which can be described as unconditioned. And then that consciousness is aware of itself. And so there is awareness of Purusha. And that awareness can be conditional. That awareness can play with its own awareness. And then the awareness puts out of itself certain qualities, highlights certain attributes, and energizes itself as force and as form. And that is Prakriti. So the Prakriti is the movement of energy and force, Purusha is the static awareness which supports that energization. Now you see this twin principle reflected in everything, in all activity, even within the domain of Prakriti, where form and name and force and matter are playing out. And you see, for example, in our mental conception, in our mental awareness, we have an idea and then we have an articulation of the idea. If you do not have an idea, well, you can't give a form to it in thought or in words. If you have an articulation in thought or words, well, there is a pure idea behind which is unarticulated. You'll find this principle of Purusha and Prakriti everywhere. In every activity of Prakriti, as the force and energy moves, there is still embedded the principle of the Purusha, which gives to Prakriti its power of expression. If Purusha withdraws, the form collapses. If Prakriti becomes still, Purusha is unmanifest. All manifestation requires this dual principle of a supporting awareness and a dynamized energy, which is nothing but the awareness dynamizing itself. And the awareness is nothing but the energy leaning back to rest. So this is the Purusha Prakriti duality. So all the last term to which we can reduce the universe, and these are all the last terms: force and matter, name and form, Purusha and Prakriti, are still not entirely that which the universe really is, either in itself or its nature. So there's the universe in itself and then the nature of the universe. And as all that we are is the play and form, the mental, psychic, vital and physical expression of a supreme self unconditioned by mind and life and body, the universe too is the play and form and cosmic soul expression and nature expression of a supreme existence which is unconditioned by force and matter, unconditioned by idea and name and form, unconditioned by the fundamental distinction of Purusha and Prakriti. So he is now paralleling the earlier discussion of our subjective experience. Just as in our experience, there is that and our relationship with that. In the same way, the universe parallels the same thing. There is that, and then there is the expression of that. So, all that we are, first, our human subjective experience, we are play and form. Play and form of mental, psychic, vital, and physical expression. Of what? Of a supreme self, unconditioned by mind, life, and body. So this was the discussion of the last 4 paragraphs. There is the supreme self, free of mind, life, body, but which articulates itself in terms of mind, life, and body as media for its self-expression, for its self-discovery, for its self-unfoldment of possibilities in the play and the form. And this is the individual subjective experience, the same way with the universe. The universe too is the play and form and cosmic soul expression and nature expression of a supreme existence which is unconditioned by all these things. So in a way, by paralleling the two, what Sri Aurobindo is doing is describing as if the universe itself as a whole body, as a whole person with a body. Our individual human experience is paralleled with the universe as a whole, and suddenly the suggestion is that we are a universe in ourselves, or the other way, the universe is a being in itself. We cannot say conscious yet, because at least we don't see the consciousness of the universe, but it's a being unfolding, evolving and journeying, just as we are a being unfolding, evolving, journeying, which has become conscious enough. The only thing is, these two beings have a relationship between them. We are part of the universe. That's all. But otherwise, they are as if two independent movements of the divine self-fulfillment. So we'll play with this idea a little more shortly. So what is the universe? Universe is play and form and cosmic soul expression and nature expression. When that unconditioned supreme existence chooses to express itself as nature, as cosmos, it is soul of cosmos, and as soul of cosmos, it chooses to express itself. It is soul of nature, and as soul of nature, chooses to express itself. But when it expresses itself, we see the whole expression to be built on this play, dual play of force and matter, name and form and idea, Purusha and Prakriti. But it is unconditioned by these distinctions. In other words, both Purusha and Prakriti are facets of itself. When it moves to manifest, it takes this dual stance. When it withdraws from manifestation, there is no Purusha, no Prakriti. It is simply what it is. Our supreme self and supreme existence, which has become the universe, so our supreme self and the supreme existence, which has become the universe, are one spirit, one self, and one existence. So here's the most interesting thing. And this is what Aurobindo points to as the single greatest discovery of the Upanishadic rishis. First, he says they discovered that we are that. Second, they discovered the universe is that self, same self. But the third greatest discovery is the self of the universe and the self of the individual are identical. And it is here, Sri Aurobindo says, that we have the greatest potential for the huge future of humanity. And it is this same idea that he is coming to from a different approach. Our supreme self and the supreme existence which has become the universe are one spirit, one self, one existence. The individual is in nature one expression of the universal being, in spirit an emanation of the transcendent. For if he finds his self, he finds too that his own true self is not this natural personality, this created individuality, but is a universal being in its relations with others and with nature, and in its upward turn, a portion or the living front of a supreme transcendent spirit. And suddenly, the whole meaning of the human evolution acquires a different light. From a certain perspective, we are nothing but this little crawling creature on a ball of dust in a humongous, apparently empty space of billions of galaxies, of billions of stars in each, of billions of planets, and so on. It doesn't matter. If it were extinguished, well, it would go on, universe would go on, a new star system would form, etc., etc. It doesn't matter. But on the other hand, when we look at it this way, where the individual is a term and a portion and a living front of a supreme transcendent spirit, the same one of whom the whole universe is a front, then suddenly this individual is as important as the whole universe. And human life is the most valuable thing, perhaps as valuable or even more valuable than the whole universe put together. In terms of this potential that we carry, not in terms of the way we live, that is useless. The potential that we carry, in terms of that potential, it is the most valuable thing. And this relationship is fascinating because we are in essence the whole universe put together. And so it is not strange that we were born within the universe and emerged within the universe. But as individuals evolving, we are directly an emanation of that. So now we see two movements. There is that one underlying existence, supreme existence, which has become the universe. And that same underlying existence as Supreme Self has taken birth in the universe as individuals. Subjectively, we are self. Objectively, the universe is that existence, Brahman. But the two are one. It's just which aspect you highlight, the subjective aspect or the objective aspect. Our supreme self and the supreme existence, which has become the universe, are one spirit, one self, one existence. The reason why he uses the word spirit, one self, one existence, because again there is a triple facet to this whole experience. One spirit, because when you move out of the domain of form to the domain of essence, the essence is the same one. But we are here not speaking of form, that is pure spirit. But when that pure spirit puts itself in relation to things and becomes the soul of all things, then it is one self. And third, when that self puts itself out and manifests its existence, then it is one existence. So there are three different statuses of that originating consciousness. One spirit when it stands back, formless essence. One self when it is the soul of all things. One existence when it is the basis for the manifestation. Of the whole universe and the individual, it is the same one existence, one self, one spirit. What does that mean when you look at it as the evolving human inside the universe? It means that on some level we are the originators of the whole universe, even as we are our own originators as individualized self. But on the other side, it means that we are the whole universe in miniature form. You will recall that phrase from the Veda, Yatha Pinde Tatha Brahmande, Yatha Brahmande Tatha Pinde. Pinda is this individual unit. Brahmanda is the cosmic egg. As in the individual unit egg, so in the cosmic egg. As in the cosmic egg, so in the individual unit or egg. But there are two great implications. One, that if our destiny is to grow into divine realization and divine manifestation, then the destiny of the universe equally is to grow into divine realization and divine manifestation. One day we can say the whole universe will be a conscious divine manifestation. Second implication is we as individuals have the power to create an entire universe while still being in the universe. And this is something extraordinary. We have some stories in the Puranic tradition of rishis who became so great that the whole cosmic balance was destabilized. And then it was the job of Indra to come and mess around and make them fall from their greatness and things like that. Suggesting something very important, that in the individual is the potential capacity for a power as great as the universe, not only to destabilize, to destroy, but rather to create a whole universe. So there is also this great rishi who creates an intermediate world when a certain king who wanted to ascend the heavens in his own body asked this rishi to do what was needed to send him to heaven. He pulled all his power, did a yajna and sent this king to the heavens. But the heavenly beings said, no, but a mortal is not allowed to come here, and they sent him back. And so there's this tug of war from both sides, push of war rather, from both sides. Until eventually this rishi says, fine, I will fulfill my promise. You will no more belong to the human domain. You will be in the heavens. But since the heavens refuse you, I will create a new heaven. And he creates a whole domain into which this king is now sent. But the idea is this, that we have within us the entire creative possibility of that which created the whole Big Bang, the whole universe. And we are miniature universes in ourselves. What this means is, for the future, is still beyond the scope of the human comprehension, but just as a hint, it would be that as each one of us becomes a vehicle for the divine manifestation, we would be able to not only reshape the whole universe, but also bring into the universe enormous possibilities, as if layers of experience into the universe which can be played out universally. We would each one of us be creators, manifestors of divinity. In a sense, that's what we are doing today when we are artists, poets, musicians, dancers, singers, whatever it is you do in creative action. You catch a truth of the higher domains, give it form, and manifest it. So there are many artists, many musicians who catch things and bring into form, but those things have been brought into form before. So we say, yes, you're good, you did a good job. But the greatest are those who are original creators. And original creators because they have brought into form something which was never before brought into form. And what are they doing? They are not merely reaching into the universal mind or the higher ranges where things are already present. They go to something still higher, to that which is unmanifest, and draw down from the unmanifest and bring into manifestation for the first time in the history of the universe. And that power we have. In a sense, you are creating or bringing into birth something which is like a new universe, but in the individual experience of the larger universe. But if you could take this to an extreme, one can sense that it could be something quite extraordinary to bring into manifestation things which have never been before, unendingly diverse and rich and beautiful and blissful in potential. So this is the implication for the future. The individual is in nature one expression of the universal being, in spirit an emanation of the transcendence. So on the one side we say the whole universe we are expressing, on the other side the transcendence we are manifesting. So in this way the individual journey and the universal journey are bridged. There's a third implication, which is the universe itself is a being, a cosmic being. The divine as universe is journeying and unfolding himself, discovering himself, revealing himself, experiencing himself as universe. And so it is equally valid to speak of the universe as a conscious universe. Though the consciousness is not fully revealed, but it is latent or it is unfolding in evolution. But in the individual, something more interesting, linking with the universe on one side and linking with the transcendence on the other side. For he finds his self, for if he finds his self, he finds too that his own true self is not this natural personality, this created individuality, but is a universal being in its relations with others and with nature, and in its upward term a portion of the living front of a supreme transcendental spirit. So we find we are universal beings in that we are not bound to this individual form only. We are in fact in deeper layers one with the whole universe. And everything that takes place in the universe is taking place in us, in our universality. And on the other side, we are the living front of a supreme transcendent spirit projecting itself into this individual. So there's a horizontal side where we experience oneness with the universe. There's a vertical side where we experience our transcendent origin manifesting as the individual. And the two meeting represents the perfected man, which was an ancient symbol, which later was co-opted into Christianity. This was the mystical sense of the cross. So here we finish the paragraph of the universe. The Supreme is Brahman in relation to the universe. And now Sri Aurobindo merges the two things and then discusses why it is necessary for making this passage of initially as if discarding the superficial appearances of form to get at something of that reality. But later, it is necessary also to recognize the other side of the world and the universe and the individual as manifestation of that reality. So this paragraph, it's a long one, but it brings in finally the approach and the perspective of the integral yoga and puts in context the supramental consciousness. I don't know if we will have enough time to get to that. Perhaps we can pause here first and take up any questions or any comments. By alter ego, you mean? In this sense, as alter ego, one would still say the alter ego is a part of your own surface personality. One part which says can't do, another part which says can do. And to that extent, we are not one person, but many different persons, many different facets of personality within the same individual. Because our nature is necessarily multifaceted and complex. But that's still part of our surface nature. It's not the true person inside. The true person has neither the conception of can do nor cannot do. It simply flows in its becoming. What it is, it flows to become. The can or cannot is still in the domain of struggle of form and of possibilities, which is part of the surface nature. He discusses in the next paragraph how it is because the mind at first needs crutches of forms, words, experiences in order to know. We can go only so far with those crutches. At some point, we have to discard those crutches in order to get to knowledge of the essential, which necessarily transcends these devices. So the need for discarding the system of negation, not this, not this, is helpful for that purpose. As a way of breaking out from this closed prison of our constructions and representations. But if we can cross beyond the twilight of mind into the consciousness which knows differently by identity, then we are no more bound to these crutches, and then we do not need this method of negation. Then we can know directly in identity, and this is the way of the integral yoga. So the method of negation is useful to train the mind and to get free of the preconceptions and the structures of the mind. And you will see a lot of the modern movements have been focusing on this aspect. There are many teachers who have tried to deconstruct mind, abandon mind, abolish mind in the same pattern as a certain approach of the Buddhist practice or the later Vedantic practice. And all of these are useful to get rid of the mind's conditioning. But then what? Suddenly you're left with a mind which is either made blank or made incapable and made helpless and stunned into silence. But this stunned state of mind is not a divine state. And I have had occasion to see many who have followed those paths, who have come to this kind of a instability even of the mental working, because if they have to be in life, their mind has to function, but they have already abandoned all the preconceived notions, and so they are left in a kind of a limbo. The journey is not complete unless you can bring something positive, yet which is not a result of constructions of the mind. And this requires a state of consciousness behind. Let me take in this context a conversation which I had with a follower of I forget the name just now, one of the modern teachers who emphasized this deconditioning of the mind. If you can help me get the name, just have a blank. Krishnamurti, yes, J. Krishnamurti. So, sorry. He's a follower of J. Krishnamurti. There are others similar, U.G. Krishnamurti and others who have taken similar positions. Even during a certain period, you find in the teachings of Rajneesh, later renamed as Osho, similar ideas. So, when speaking with this follower of Krishnamurti, I put it in these terms. He said, "What do you really think of Krishnamurti?" And it is his guru. I said, as I understand it, his message was that one needs to break free of mental constructions. But his message, which he highlighted, is different from his experience, which is something greater, which he did not highlight. That one has to go beyond the construction to something which is a positive affirmation and not merely a negation. And we find that in his actions and in his private comments in his life. But the highlight of his teaching was the deconstruction, and unfortunately, the followers only catch that side of it. So, to that extent, when I put it in this context, to that extent, all of these teachers have served that purpose. But beyond the point, once one has deconstructed, one cannot stop there, otherwise, one is left halfway. What needs to fill in is not a new construction that would simply be brainwashing. What needs to fill in is a new state of cognition, a new state of consciousness, which can know by different means. And it is this which Sri Aurobindo points to. But if we can once cross beyond the mind's frontier twilight into the vast plane of supramental knowledge, these devices cease to be indispensable. Supermind has quite another, a positive and direct and living experience of the Supreme Infinite. And so that's the approach of the integral yoga. And that's why you will see here the focus is primarily to open oneself to a deeper and a higher consciousness, deeper by concentration on the divine presence in the heart, on the psychic presence, and higher by concentration above mind, and opening to that directly and invoking its intervention from above and from within. To the extent that Our mind is already conditioned, our personality is already locked in grooves of habit. We are required to dissolve these false preconceptions. To that extent, the approach of negation is useful as a means, as a temporary device. So the practice of dissociating the consciousness from the body and saying, I am not body, dissociating from emotions and saying, I am not emotion, and even dissociating from mind and saying, I am not this thinking mind. To that extent, this practice is useful. It allows a base of consciousness which stands back, unaffected by their turbidities. But once such a base is set, we do not stop there. From there, we turn either to the psychic or to the above mind consciousness. With those as the deeper truths, not this. This is only a temporary provisional station of consciousness. One may not even go through a formal process of disengagement in this way, but if one does, it is a great help. So this puts the approach of the integral yoga in relation to these traditional exercises. Yes. Mhm. Yes, yes, absolutely. Yes, 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 it is like that. This is extraordinary, isn't it? Yes, mhm. Okay, yes, okay. So there's a distinction between bringing it down into the domain of mind or vital and then giving it form in the physical. If you can give it form in the physical, then only it's complete in its manifestation, and then of course you're sharing it with everybody. But even otherwise, even the supramental music. But on other planes, one could share only in that plane. It would not be brought all the way to its greatest potential. So just to share with others this idea, as creators, we have the potential to reach up to the highest source and bring down into manifestation all the way down to the most material. So whatever may be the limitations of the material substance and material means. The beings who live in the worlds of mind or the vital, they can only manifest in their domain. They cannot bring it all the way to the matter. They depend on a material instrument to bring it to the matter. So the Gandharvas, for example, they manifest in the domains of the higher vital plane, extraordinary music and dance and art and beauty. But if it is to be brought on earth, well, they have to enter in relation with a human being. Or the human being has to draw from there to concretize in matter. So to that extent, linking from the highest supreme to the lowest material is possible only for the human being and not for any of the intermediate beings who can assist the human being perhaps, which very often happens, but they need this human individual to complete that link if it is to be brought all the way down. And this is why we say, or the yogic tradition says, human beings are in potential greater than the gods because they can do something which the gods cannot. And yet, when the supramental consciousness manifests fully, and we are vehicles of the supramental manifestation, then the material resistance would be overcome to an extraordinary degree. And perhaps even there'll be a progression within that. and degrees of beauty and harmony and experience of bliss could be manifested materially, which currently are not possible, or are only possible in the higher ranges. And it is when those degrees are brought into the material consciousness that we will truly be able to say, yes, now this is a divine manifestation. And at that point, there will be a scope even to provide vehicles for these beings of the higher worlds, including the godlike beings, to associate with the human body and human consciousness and participate in this kind of manifestation freely, which right now they cannot do. So these are extraordinary possibilities for the future. There is another interesting implication of this individual and universe association, equivalence, let's say. And that is to say, we are a miniature cosmos. In us, everything that is in the universe is represented potentially, in potential, but also that we are connected, therefore, with everything in the universe, in all the parts of our being. So in the mind more easily because we can open to universal ideas, in the body less easily because the body is more rigidly bound to form. But still, it means that we could turn into ourselves subjectively, shut off the external universe, and observing within ourselves get to know everything that's in the universe because we are one with the universe in some part. So looking into ourselves, we can see all that is in the universe by a kind of either by a reflection or simply by observing the thing in us as it functions because it functions the same way in the universe. But there are then 3 degrees. One is we see what is in us and know that it's the same out there in the universe. The second degree is where we see this thing in us, it resonates with that which is in the universe and forms a link, a thread. And so we as if receive all the threads of the universal working reflected in us, and we see the universe in ourselves. And a third step beyond that, we extend our own consciousness along those threads and identify in experience with what is happening anywhere in the universe. And eventually in cosmic consciousness, we can identify with everything that's happening everywhere in the universe. But this identity and this equivalence allows for all this very rich possibility of experience. In fact, all these 3 things are already happening within us subliminally. Our surface personality is not conscious, it's happening. And when it happens, something of it reflects in the surface consciousness, and we have suddenly, spontaneously, an idea, an intuition, a knowledge, or an experience of something. We don't know where it came from, we don't know how it happened. But if we could open this veil which separates the surface awareness from the subliminal dimensions, then we can consciously enter within and explore ourselves and thereby the whole universe in these various ways. And this does not require any great spiritual development. Much of what we call occult science and occult knowledge is only dealing with this part of our potential. Yes. 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 And is still holding it. Mhm. He does. With limited importance. Yes, yes, it is. It is so. In fact, the question is about astrology, whether there is a basis to it, and whether it is a kind of a map. Yes, it is, and I'll first describe what Sri Aurobindo has to say about it, and then we will look at the way it maps it. Sri Aurobindo describes astrology as a valid science, but a science which charts only a very narrow band of the universe, of the life force in particular. And the imprint which is described in the horoscope acts only to the extent that you are bound to life force. The moment you stand out of life force, even in mind, as a self-aware witness, observe your own emotional reactions and instincts and say, well, I will not do this. You've already broken free from the tendencies of astrological imprints. Second, he says, astrology highlights only the first imprint of the character. Character is only the bundle of habits which form your personality. There is a deeper personality which can override the character and change it, and there is a deeper soul which can completely recast the personality and the character, and therefore we are essentially free. To the extent that we choose not to tap into that freedom which is ours, and we choose to live mechanically as half animals instinctively, to that extent the horoscope describes the patterns of our life, but he says much more the character than the events. Because my character is thus, the events are likely to be thus. But it's the character which it captures much more. So what does it capture? And if you look at it as a map, and taking in mind this relationship of the individual with the universe, at the moment when a new movement is brought into initiation, brought into form, when it enters the domain of form and is initiated as a force with a form, at that moment it is impacted by everything that is in the universe and is in a way a miniature representation of the universe. Where it goes after that is dependent on the energy and the purpose which motivates it. Okay? So it is this truth which the chart captures. At the moment of our birth, we have entered the domain of human form and human life, and we reflect or receive an imprint of the state of the universe. But if that is our starting point, what we make of that starting point is still our freedom. But how it captures in the chart, this is an articulation which I have formulated, let's say, having explored astrology a little bit. What I saw in the chart is there is a relationship which is first captured between the two extremes, the universal and the individual. And these two are first set in relationship, and then the play of nature is represented within them. And that's the complete chart. You will remember in The Life Divine, the first page, Sri Aurobindo says, everything boils down to God, man, and nature. Okay. It's something of that which is represented, except that the universal or God, how do you see it? How do you know it? How is it represented in the universe? And it is represented by the one thing to the human experience which is permanent, the stars. The layout of the zodiac, the way the stars are set, as they used to be billions of years ago, but which are unmoving, they're fixed to the human experience subjectively, that represents the absolute reality as represented in the universe. So that is one side. The other side is the individual. And for the individual experience, I am fixed, I am the center of the universe revolves around me. So my viewpoint, where I am the center of the universe, and then the universal viewpoint, they are placed against each other. The zodiac and then what we call houses. Both are divided into 12. Why 12? One could have a different discussion on that. But it represents facets, aspects, powers of the individual potential and the universal self-expression. And the two are matched first. So the houses rotate over the zodiac, or the zodiac rotates over the houses, whichever system, northern or southern, doesn't matter how you represent it. You fix one, make the other rotate over it. And then in between are the mediators. So what mediates between that and us? The forces of nature. To the extent that we as the individual are a part of the universe, the mediators are those who hold energies or direct energies, and these are graha. Graha in Sanskrit means not planet, but those who hold. They seize on, they hold, they contain. So these are the representatives of various energies. Each has a personality, each has certain qualities, and depending on how they are placed in our relationship with the universe, they affect us by highlighting, intensifying, or weakening those qualities in us. That's all. So when you look at the chart, what I'm seeing there is how the universe impacts this individual and how these mediating powers intensify or weaken those impacts, and therefore the imprint of the character at the start. And in the start is also the natural unfolding if you did nothing else. So to that extent, how the character will unfold over time if you didn't make an effort. So we see tendencies, mostly psychological tendencies in the chart. And then if this is my imprint of character, the current shifting energies of the planets, they modify further. And that can be further refined to describe what is happening to you now. All of this is useful to the extent that we are still slaves of our instinct and life energy. For those who seek a spiritual life, it's better not to get entangled in them, because as the mother explains, when you turn to the deities behind the planets and give them importance and a place in your life, you give them more access and more influence in you. So she says, when you pay attention to them, they also pay attention to you. And to that extent, you get more entrenched in their influence. So it is better, especially for a spiritual seeker, to not look at these things, rather accept whatever comes when it comes and deal with it at that point to the best of your capacity, but rather put ourselves in direct relation with the divine consciousness, which is the greater freedom above all these things, and ask for that intervention and that help to lead our life. When it rains, we don't bind our life because it's raining. We open an umbrella and walk in the rain. So that's the divine grace that you invoke to protect yourself from whatever energies push or pull. You don't stop your life just because it's a bad period according to some astrological influence. On the other hand, the meaning of good and bad equally can be different for a yogi. What in conventional life would be considered a bad period because you will have to go through many oppositions, for the yogi it will be, this is a period of great growth because I will overcome many limitations within myself. So which is good and which is bad has no meaning for us. Everything is an opportunity for growth. Yes.
I was thinking about the amount of inundation that you would have in that things are good or bad, that's a lower you see all of the open outlook. And therefore, in the hundreds of jobs, then you can be only good.
Yes, yes. Potentially.
I don't this is something I'm just doing.
The way Sri Aurobindo articulates, there's this saying, everything happens, all that happens for the best. Sri Aurobindo says that's not true. All that happens does not happen for the best. But the divine can make the best use of it. Because we are in the middle of a battle. The battle between evolutionary forces and anti-evolutionary forces. And sometimes there are lapses, there are breakdowns, there are setbacks. It's not always for the best, but having had a setback, the divine makes the best use of it to consolidate and move forward with greater strength. And that's the attitude we should take. Our individual's upward term is a portion of the living front of the supreme transcendent spirit. Then within us also is the power of that transcendent spirit. And backing us is the power of that transcendent spirit. Since it is that same transcendent spirit which cast the universe into form, it is the same spirit in us which can recast the universe, even change its laws. And that's really what evolution is about. At each step of evolution, a new level of consciousness unfolds, which brings with it a new law and a new principle which was not there before. And so our whole humanness is fulfilled only when we overcome the limited working and limited laws by a greater power which transforms and overrides those laws. So to settle into astrology is to entrap yourself in the past and the old laws and the old rhythms and cut off from the higher truth which we have come here to manifest. That's why you will see mothers comment sometimes. Somebody asked her, "Oh, there's an eclipse happening. Will it affect your work?" And mother says, "No, my work is not affected by any eclipse or any phenomena of nature." And yet you will find in temples, they shut down the temple, they close the gates, and they do pujas after the eclipse because of whatever. Because the temple, remember, is still a device, a machinery using certain energies of nature, invoking a spiritual power, but in an arrangement which is still dependent on the functioning of nature's energies. It's an occult formation. A spiritual formation is different. A spiritual formation can override nature's method processes. So the Matri Mandir will not be shut because of an eclipse. Yes. 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 Really? Yes. 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 You see, the good astrologers look at these patterns, and the pattern describes a certain relationship of energies, and then it's an intuition which kicks in, especially if it is somebody with a spiritual practice. An intuition kicks in and recognizes a form associated with that pattern, specific to you. So, a good astrologer who is able to capture forms is generally somebody with an intuition functioning. I give an example of my own. Well, I had a lot to say on this theme because I went through a period of about 2 years where I was experimenting to see what the intuition would show and what the astrology would show, how they were matching or not, to what extent one could change and overcome those things, etc. So there's one interesting thing because I was talking to an astrologer at that point. He was very good. He could look at a chart and describe your physical appearance without having met you. And it's very easy to do because the different parts of the chart correspond to different parts of the body, and it's almost a mechanical process. So he told me at a certain point, a certain combination for a period of 6 months. He said, "You will change house." So I made a note of that, and then I forgot about it. And as it happened, there was a period of time when I was involved with a certain project. I had actually to be out of station in a way that I had to leave my clothes in Delhi and shuttle back and forth so that I didn't have to carry things back and forth. I had a little house there for those periods of about 6 months, and then it stopped and the whole thing ended there. It was fascinating to see what it meant in the chart. It was a combination of planetary energies which is associated with displacement of your base. And that's what we articulate in physical terms as moving house. And it was there as a pattern. And well, it works. But is it psychological? Is it physical? On what level does it operate? Depends on where we live. So Mother put it in this way. She said, destiny is on many levels. Depending on which level of consciousness you live on, that's your destiny. If you switch levels, that's the new destiny. But what the chart captures is certain patterns which are common. But the meaning of those patterns has to be interpreted according to which level you live on. And that's interesting also. So when, for example, very often it is said in the chart, a period which would normally be associated with marriage, okay, is for a person in the spiritual life, it is a period of union or experience of union with a deeper or higher consciousness. It is uniting two things, but you are uniting what depends on where you are living. So one can even look at the chart from a spiritual perspective and find interesting patterns in this way. And that's why I would discourage approaching astrologers. Most of them don't really know the deeper principle. They just go by a rule of thumb and guesswork, and mostly mixtures of both, tapping on your fears and your desires. But even if there was somebody with a deeper insight, what would it say? They would only say something which you would already know. There's nothing new. When it happens, you know it. When it doesn't happen, you don't know it. So it has no value. Sri Aurobindo for a while was teaching astrology to Pavitrada, and Pavitrada would consult with him, and Sri Aurobindo would show him how to read these deeper dimensions. So some of the early sadhaks who came here, they were asked to send their birth time, and Pavitrada would cast the chart, and Sri Aurobindo would point out how one could see there even the possibilities of a spiritual potential. One can make out also in the chart whether the life will be a very narrow, safe groove, or whether it would be a wide and rich life, whether it would be a more materially oriented or a more idealistically oriented. All of these things one can see patterns. But ultimately, at any point, the soul can come forward and say, I change this, and choose its own fate, cast its own fate, so to say. Yes.
I think there's something about the
Yes.
you to ignorance of people or afraid of it. It's an alignment. I mean, I see only on two things. But when the moon moves right there and there, that moment of the glory of so how can people think that's a bad thing?
No, it's because of the occult. You see, all of these traditions, they refer to a truth. The moon represents symbolically the subtle physical, and the sun represents ideally the light of the truth, but some part of the higher mental consciousness or self. So the alignment of Earth, Moon, Sun creates a situation where there's a pressure, where the subtle physical and the physical are very closely pressed together. And it allows an occasion when you can cross the barrier easily. So beings of the lower worlds can extend their influence in the gross physical. Equally, people in the physical world can reach through to extend, to tap into higher ranges of consciousness more easily. That's the idea. So it's considered a bad period because it's a period when lower beings can have a freer influence on earth affairs. That's generally why animals get a little rattled. But on the other hand, for a spiritual seeker, they say that's the time when you should do your puja and do your mantra, because you can intensify the power of the mantra because you're able to tap into more intensely into higher influence and things like that. It works both ways, but if you understand the principle, it's one of thinning the veil between different worlds.
You're connected to the mind,
Yes. Yes. So, okay, so we'll end with this. For if he finds his self, he finds too that his own true self is not this natural personality, this created individuality, but is a universal being in its relations with others and with nature. And in its upward term, a portion or a living front of a supreme transcendent spirit. And this is what we are. Oh.